I can't feed myself and feed my child, and I can't go to work with a child on my back. So we started a daycare program, and we would have to explain in detail to these moms what daycare is. Because what we realized about 2 years after starting the program was that we had started the first infant daycare in the entire country of Ethiopia.
Hey, my friends, do you know that Ethiopia is one of the only countries on earth that doesn't actually have like a 911 number, an emergency number for people to call when there's something gravely wrong? Well, one was just started. It was started by a pro-life activist, a beautiful Catholic mom of 12 children, eight biological children and 4 adopted. She's doing amazing work in Ethiopia. You're going to get to meet her right now. Stay tuned to this episode of the John Henry Weston Show. Hey, my friends, are you looking to see Father James Altman? I sure am, and I'm going to see him June 20th through 22nd at the Coalition for Cancelled Priests Conference right near Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You'll be able to hear from myself, also from Dr. Janet Smith and Michael Hitchborn, and many more. Go to the Cancelled Priests website at cancelledpriests.org to sign up right now before all the tickets are gone. We'll see you in Wisconsin. Marcia Erickson, welcome to the program.
Thank you, John Henry. It's such an honor to be with you.
Let's begin as we always do with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Marcy, I've been looking forward to doing this for a long time. We've been stumbled a few times when we've tried before, but praise God, we're able to do this now. I think I know a lot about you already. I need everybody to know about you as well. Tell us how you got to this. You're doing amazing work there in Ethiopia, but I want the backstory first. How did you get there? Where did this come from?
So I was born and raised in Naples, Florida. And when I was a senior in high school, I prayed asking God what he wanted me to do with my life. I actually said a very specific prayer. I said, would you like me to become a religious sister or to go to college? And I really heard God say, neither. I want you to be a missionary. Now, at that point, I had never met a Catholic lay missionary. I just kind of thought, and in my head, I saw Africa and knew that it meant serving the Lord and serving the poorest people that in the ways that I could help reach them. And so at 18 years old, I became a missionary full time. I started first in Guatemala and then went to Ethiopia for the first time. And a little bit of my backstory, though, is that, there's many people that say that their family bleeds military, for example. Everyone is military. There's generations of military. My family is like that with pro-life. So my mom helped start the first pregnancy center in our area. And I think it was one of 13 that started in the state at that time in the 74, I believe it was. They just celebrated their 50 years. And then my mom went on to start Sunlight Home, which is a home for pregnant unwed mothers here in Collier County. And during that time, I mean, one of my earliest memories was being about 2 or 3 years old, sitting in a stroller and being pushed back and forth on a sidewalk. And I remember it very clearly because I was giving my mom a hard time because I wanted to leave and go home. And she was telling me to be quiet, and they were praying outside of Planned Parenthood. And I very clearly remember the walls of Planned Parenthood painted with beautiful people holding hands and children. And I couldn't understand why you would be praying outside of a place that had these beautiful paintings that were so welcoming. And we know now, of course, the trick and how the devil works through Planned Parenthood. And so it was just interesting. That was my earliest memory. And then starting at age 13, I joined a pro-life youth group. I would go to the March for Life every year and participate in volunteering at nursing homes and different things like that. And so I've been to the March for Life about 13 times, starting from that early age, and was able to actually be in the National Right to Life committee. I was for Teens for Life as a teenager. And so then at 18, I left, and everything changed when you go from Naples, Florida to Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Indeed. It's a beautiful trajectory. If you don't mind backing up for 1 second, because that's a very powerful faith life to tell our Lord, do you want me to be a nun or what? Right away you had that openness to our Lord. Where did that come from? Where the strong faith? That's pretty unique.
Well, I definitely have praying parents, especially a mom who basically has attended daily mass for years and years and years. And she always prayed for God to bring the right people into my life. And especially when I was a teenager and a bit rebellious, I was always very strong-willed growing up. Um, she just prayed for God to bring me the right people. And at that point, I had people coming to me quite often saying, you should consider religious life. And I was 17, I would say between the age of 16, 17, and then 18. They would say that, priests would say that, other people would say that. And so that's where that specific prayer came from. But it was a long, difficult road to get to there. In high school, I had a very tumultuous experience. I had a dear friend who I had met, and we had planned to marry, and he ended up passing away when I was 16 years old. He died of cancer. But he was the one that really pulled me into the faith and taught me so many different things, and then led me to introduce me to who became a person who became my best friend, and her father became a mentor for me and a leader. And that is where my life turned around, if you could say that. But I was
Beautiful.
raised in the church. My mom has always been so devoted. And I think one thing never changed is when I grew up and became more, let's say, in difficult places, maybe a little bit more rebellious. I always knew pro-life was the most important. Like I just, and now I know why, because God is first, right? And he is the one that gave us life. But at that point, that was never going to waver for me.
Beautiful. Okay, so here you are, a young lady, in fact, very young still, in Ethiopia. What are you doing there, and how did that go down?
So I applied to different mission organizations back in the day when you applied by mail and looked things up, through catalogs. And to be honest, no one accepted me, really. I mean, no one wanted an 18-year-old kid to come and help volunteer. I wasn't asking for pay or anything like that. But I ended up being accepted to one organization that had places in 86 different countries throughout the world at the time. And I just said, send me somewhere in Africa. And they sent me to Ethiopia. And I was teaching English at a school, a local Catholic school. I had about 300 students. I had absolutely no teaching experience, but it was an adventure every day. I had students from ages 3 up to middle-aged adults. I actually was teaching all the teachers as well, because they really wanted English in this area is very important, because once you get to grade 8, everything switches from their native language to English. And so all of a sudden they have all their textbooks in English, all their teachers are speaking English, all their tests. And so they want to make sure these children and even adults have a foundation of English. And so it's quite an adventure, but at the same time, it was in the middle of a 5-year famine. And every day we had starving babies that were brought to the gate. And it was so challenging and so traumatic. I mean, to be honest, just hundreds and hundreds of these babies that, I never thought I would see face to face. And one experience after the next of children not surviving. Even some of my students that were healthy, I would say, oh, where is so and so today? And they'd say, oh, she died last night. And it was just like, I um I was quite, really almost broken by the experience of just seeing the heartache that these people endure day in and day out. And for that reason, I really thought God was not going to bring me back to Ethiopia, because I thought, who can do this life? Who can endure this? But I knew God was calling me to be a missionary for life. So when I came back after my first year in Ethiopia, I went to college for a few years and knew that God was calling me for life to be a missionary, and I couldn't change that, and I didn't want to change that. But I thought for sure he's not calling me to Ethiopia. And so I went to many other countries in Africa, and God blessed me in every place that I went. I would meet someone and they'd say, come work for my mission or my church or my school in this area of another country. And I would just travel by bus and volunteer in all these different locations. And 5 years later, I wanted to go back to Ethiopia just to visit my former students and see how they were doing. And I had this fear of going back, because I thought, how many of them are not alive anymore, after 5 years? And I went back and visited my former students and saw many of them, and some of them had passed, sadly, tragically. And at that point, God made it very clear that he wanted me in Ethiopia. And I was in touch with an organization in the capital city, Addis Ababa, that worked with street children. And they suggested I reach out to our local bishop. And I did. I sent an email to him at that point, and he responded to me like almost immediately. And apparently he was in Rome in a big meeting, and somehow he saw this email come through, and he had never heard of anyone wanting to live in Ethiopia. And at this point, because of to backtrack a little bit, the first year that I was in Ethiopia, there were babies that were abandoned quite often. And so at this point, I felt like my calling was to adopt and foster care for as many children as I could personally take on. And so that's what I had described in this email to the bishop, was that I'm planning to live in Ethiopia. I want to foster and adopt as many children as I can personally take on and just do my best to raise them in their culture. And so he had never heard of anyone wanting to do this. So he responded right away, put me in touch with a priest that I met with, who told me they really needed help in this city called Bahir Dar. So I decided to make a three-day trip up to Bahir Dar to just see, if where the Lord was leading, and to see what it was like and experience the area. And by the way, that priest that had told me to come to Bahir Dar, which is where I did end up settling, is now our bishop.
Oh, that's great. Marcy, let me stop you for a second. You mentioned that the Lord really made it clear he wanted you to stay in Ethiopia. Can you tell us about that? What does that look like? How did he communicate that to you, and how did you know?
Sure. Well, I've always just kind of thought that prayer should be like breathing. We should just be in this constant kind of conversation with the Lord. And I was concerned about the language not coming back, that I would forget the language. And immediately the language came back to me. And it had been 5 years, and I was only there for a year to begin with. And it was funny, when I first went over the first year, I said, I really want to learn the language. And all the sisters that I was working with, and everyone I was working with, actually laughed at me. They said, "Oh, it's impossible to learn this language." And I will agree, it's very, very difficult. It's Amharic is the language where they are, and it's the fourth hardest language for English speakers to learn.
Wow.
And there's no way you can learn it outside of the country, really, and especially at that time, because you didn't have any audio help. There was really no one in the area that I knew that was Ethiopian, in Naples, Florida, for sure. But one of the prayers that I also prayed specifically about where the Lord was leading me. There were two prayers, actually, that I just look back at. I'm just like, God is just so amazing. One of them was before I went to Bahir Dar to visit on that 3-day period. I said, okay, Lord, if this is where you want me, then I want to meet someone that um, that can treat malaria, because malaria is what I had seen the most deaths of the first year I was in Ethiopia. That's how a lot of my students passed away so quickly. And so I said,
Hmm.
I want to meet someone who's very good at treating malaria. And I said, preferably an American, not, it could be Canadian, right? Could be Canadian, but I mean a foreigner that knows the culture where I'm from, that could come to me in the middle of the night. You know what I mean? If one of my kids is
Hmm.
sick. Um, and so I was wandering around this rural area in Bahir Dar with my camera, just taking photos as I always do, even to this day. And I came across this couple that were obviously foreigners. I introduced myself and I said, "Oh, where are you from?" And they said, "Well, we're from Florida." And I said, "Really?" I said, "I'm from Florida too." And they said, and I said, what do you do here?" And she said, the husband said, we specialize in growing a plant that's used to treat malaria.
Wow.
So the wife was a nurse and the husband was an agriculturalist. And I went, okay, God, that outdid me completely. Um, and then my second prayer was that I would meet an Ethiopian that knew both cultures equally as well. So
Hmm.
someone that knew, and in my mind, I actually said someone who was born in Ethiopia, but lived in the United States, but now lives in Ethiopia.
Hmm.
Okay, like a citizen of both places, or at least equal in the knowledge or understanding. And the next day I met Gush Asafa, who was born in Ethiopia, went to the US to study and ended up becoming a social worker in the US. And after 20 years in the US, moved back to Ethiopia, began taking in children and helping people go to school and learn farming. And he moved back to Ethiopia just to be able to help his people. So that was the answer to
Wow.
the second prayer. And he ended up actually introducing me to my husband, and
Oh, wow.
he is my husband's uncle. So it's
Oh,
just
wow.
this amazing. I just tell people, like, there's no greater life than just saying yes to God as much as we can, day by day.
Indeed, indeed. And I think a lot of people need help, especially with that portion, learning how God communicates to us His will, His will. For a lot of people, sort of still searching, "What do you want me to do, Lord?" And it's particularly young people. So thank you very much for sharing that. So, okay, so you're now there. You know you're called to be there. Take us from there.
Sure. So again, my plan was to foster and adopt as many children as I could personally take on. I was also teaching English once again. And I received my first son when he was 2 years and 9 months old. And 3 weeks later, I received another phone call. And that's when I received my second son, who was 13 days old. And 3 weeks later, I received my third son when he was 3 months old. So
Oh,
the two boys
jeez.
are, yeah, they're 6 weeks apart in age. And at that point, I said, okay, let me go to the capital city. I was told I had to go to the capital city to complete the adoptions of my children. So I said, let me go to the capital city, because I didn't want to um, have children with me and then maybe at some point need to have an emergency trip back to the US and not be able to take my children.
Hmm.
I had already decided, my children, we travel together, we stay together, we do life together. And so I went to the capital city to complete the adoption process. And I had talked to this orphanage beforehand, and they said that they would help me. And they were very, very kind to help me. However, I was told that this orphanage was the best orphanage in the country. And I can tell you that upon walking through the front door of this 4-story orphanage building, I just began to cry. The
Hmm.
conditions that these children were living in were absolutely horrendous. They had a rule that you don't hold the children, because if you hold them, they'll want to be held.
Oh,
And
wow.
when you don't hold children, they cry for a couple days and then they don't anymore. And that's the problems that you see with attachment and adoption and things like that, because they were used to not being held. They were used to not being touched. And every time I would do something to complete, I would have to do paperwork or anything to help complete the adoption process. I would have to leave my children in this orphanage. And I could hear my almost 3-year-old son screaming from the top floor just as I'm walking out the door. I mean, just echoing through the whole place. And
Yeah.
my littlest one at the time was, he came to me quite malnourished and quite frail. And by that point, he hadn't even smiled. He was still very tiny. And I would, bring him to where the other babies were in a little car seat with a bottle ready to be fed to him. And sometimes I would be in the city doing paperwork. One time in particular, for about 8 hours, I came back. He's still sitting in the car seat. The bottle's still sitting next to him full.
Oh gosh.
No one has touched him. No one has done anything. And of course, the diaper was a whole nother story by that point, 8 hours. So this is what these children had lived through or had to live through, all the children in this orphanage. And I really, the day that I completed the adoption and I left the orphanage, I looked down and my little son, James, the same one that was sitting in that car seat all day, looked at me and smiled. And I looked up and I saw a rainbow in the sky. I went, okay, God's promise. And I was almost in this point of, I just want to leave this behind and go start my life in Bahir Dar, start raising my kids, continue teaching English if that's what the Lord wants me to do. But really, upon returning to Bahir Dar, within 3 days, more people are coming to me asking me to take in more children. And I went, oh, Lord, I'm a single mom. I'm not sleeping. I can't take any more children. And they would say to me, well, where do you expect us to go? Like, where can we go? And I just stopped and I went, I have no answer. I have no answer for them. And so I was laying in bed one day and really I felt like God gave me this vision, and I could see very clearly that how we would have a center that could be properly run, having one caregiver for every 2 infants, having the proper love needed for children. And I even saw the layout of the buildings, the trees, and I just jumped up out of bed and I said, okay, God, if this is coming from you, then you will give me the people to help me run this. And I had some friends that were volunteering in the capital city at the time. I called them and told them I had this crazy idea, and they stopped me in the middle of the first sentence. They said, we're moving up there to help you start. So God answered that prayer in less than 5 minutes. We began with about 5 foster children, and at this point, we serve over 50,000 individuals annually.
Whoa. Whoa. That's insane. I'm sorry. That's just crazy.
That was 2006. So, and what began with, we weren't sure how it was going to look, but the main thing that we've continually done with Grace Center is we've said, let's look at each person as an individual. God sees us all as individuals. He doesn't lump us into a category of being pregnant or not pregnant, male, female, HIV positive or not, so I had worked for so many projects and they specifically helped in one area. And what I found was, especially in a place like Ethiopia where there aren't other programs, is that just didn't work for where I was. I needed to be able to say to this person, God sees you and God is with you, and here's how we can help, and not send people away that were genuinely in need. I mean, one of the things that I saw really early in my missionary experience was I was visiting this wonderful program that helped people get prosthetic limbs. And while I was there was a woman that came with her 6-year-old boy that was so thin, probably the weight of a 1-year-old, maybe a 2-year-old, 6 years old, laying in her lap, dying of starvation, couldn't hold his head up. And the people at this organization said, I'm sorry, we don't feed people here. And at that moment in my life, I said, Lord, let that never be me. And it wasn't that they were being mean or unkind. they had just learned that they had been taught we just can't help everyone. We can't do everything, which is a very common way to think. But I like to say we can, because our God is so much bigger than this one thing that we see. And so that's how it started, with just saying yes and continually praying for people and working with people.
Truth has a power of its own. It moves hearts and saves lives. It heals wounds and restores souls, but only if it is heard. That's why our enemies are working nonstop to suppress the truth. That's why LifeSite News is the most censored life, faith, and family news source in the world. They are working to keep you in the dark. They are working overtime to make you feel alone and forgotten. But God says, I will never forget you. God never leaves us without hope of victory. And LifeSite News will never stop sharing the truth that sets us free. We will tell the truth without fear. We will tell the truth without compromise. And as mainstream platforms silence us, we will build our own. That's why I'm pleased to announce the launch of the new LSNTV app, which can bring all of LifeSite News' top video content direct to your phone, tablet, computer, and TV, so that you can bypass the censors and keep fighting with us for life, faith, family, and freedom. Don't be alone in the darkness. We've been canceled. Fight the cancellation. Download the app.
So we began with about 5 foster children, and our children's home grew a bit. But what we realized was that if we could catch these mothers, which we always did from day one, if we could catch them before they abandoned their child and talk to them, their problems were very similar, in that I can't feed myself and feed my child, and I can't go to work with a child on my back. So we started a daycare program, and we would have to explain in detail to these moms what daycare is. Because what we realized about 2 years after starting the program was that we had started the first infant daycare in the entire country of Ethiopia. There's about 110 million people in Ethiopia, and there were no daycares for these babies and this greatly prevented these babies from being abandoned. And the hard part is that when they're abandoned, oftentimes they don't survive for someone to find them. And so looking around our daycare often through the years, I've just said, wow, look at all these babies that are alive, and these moms that thought they were going to have to abandon their baby and thought they had no hope. And, they've been able to have a new life. We will help them find jobs. We'll help them with housing. We'll help them. And we do it in a way that doesn't create dependency, but helps to lift them up and help them see, I can do this. And this God that you told me about is real,
Beautiful. Tell us a bit about how you met your husband and your children that you two have had together. And before I want to get to the 911 as well.
Sure, of course. So I had mentioned before, Gush Asafa ended up introducing me to my husband. It's interesting because I didn't know that we met when we met, but there's actually a couple times where I looked back just recently, not too long ago, a few years ago, I looked back at old photos, and I found a photo of him from about 2 years before I ever thought I met him. And he's sitting there with a couple of other people that I knew, and he would be the only person in that photo that I actually didn't know at the time, but I had met him. And at one point we were looking for a place to rent for our project. By this time we had outgrown the other rental houses, and it was a 2-story building that was previously a school, and it overlooked a big garbage dump. And I looked down in the garbage dump, and I saw someone that was naked walking through the garbage dump, trying to find something that was a piece of clothing, trying to put on boxes for clothes, and this person, who is obviously a young man, found an old, very, very old girl's dress, and he was trying to fit it on. And I just started crying. I was like, I can't believe I'm seeing this out the window of the second story of this building. And the man that was showing us the building went downstairs, and he had a shirt, two shirts on. So he gave the top shirt to this boy who was obviously, once we saw him, cognitively disabled.
Hmm.
And it was something that stuck with me because I had never seen personally an Ethiopian male, a man, um, just helping his people like that in such a
Hmm.
real and tangible way. And a year later, I was adopting my daughter, and in comes this same man that had shown us the building saying, "How is the adoption process going?" And this is when I realized I could have done the adoption locally.
Hmm.
But I was local in Bahir Dar, and he said, "How's the adoption process going?" I said, "Well, it would have gone great if the lawyer that I hired actually showed up." And
Hmm.
the lawyer at this point hadn't showed up, and actually he never did show up. But the same person who had shown me this house went into the judge and said, "Look, I'm not a lawyer, but I would be happy to help her proceed with the adoption." And so I went, "Okay, if he can help, I'm happy to do this." So he helped me with my daughter's adoption process. She was 5 at the time. And then a year later, I ran into him. I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to law school because I wanted to be able to help more people the way I helped you." Okay. So I kind of, it was one of those things in Ethiopia, they don't have a dating culture. They have a culture of you know this person, you meet them, uh, you pray, you get married. So
Hmm.
within a few months after that, we were married. And
Oh, wow.
we've since had 8 children. And it's been such a blessing. Our daughter that I was adopting when he helped me is now 22, and she's married and has a baby herself. So her youngest is 8 months old, and my youngest is 4 months old. So we have a lot of fun
Wow.
together.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, the Lord has really seemed to bless you a lot. One of the neat things is I actually think that culture of dating that way is probably, or preparation for marriage that way is probably more healthy than what we've got going on here. But nonetheless, tell us about. Yeah, I'm partially from an Indian background, and they have arranged marriages, which are somewhat similar. But
Also in Ethiopia, they have many that are arranged marriages as well.
yeah, and they're not as you might think. You know, you're arranged. Here's what you're stuck with. Tough luck for you. It's much more. Here's some options for you. If you don't like this set, we'll try another set. But anyway,
And it's
um,
usually about families coming together. In a lot of these
In,
rural communities, they
indeed.
know each other, and they grow up together. So yeah.
Yeah.
no, that's exactly it. The parents sort of work with other parents, and it's a beautiful thing, actually. Nonetheless, um, tell us about the 911. I thought this was really fascinating because as you started the first infant daycare, if you will, for these poor moms who need to work and would otherwise have to abandon their children, you've now started a 911 service. Tell us about that.
So yeah, I was driving south on the interstate in the US in Florida a few years ago, and I came across this billboard sign that says, "Don't abandon your baby, please call this number." And I just all of a sudden said, "Why have we never done this in Ethiopia?" And at that point, God quickly reminded me, "You've never done this because up until recently, no one had phones." I went,
Wow.
"Oh." I mean, when I first went to Ethiopia, there would be one phone for a neighborhood, and they would come outside and yell the name of the person, and you'd have to run and get to the phone.
Hmm. Right.
Nowadays, most people have cell phones because it's not that they pay monthly for them. They can get a really cheap cell phone and honestly never use it. They just have it. And then you pay per minute that you use. So as I'm thinking about putting these billboard signs, and I said, "This is what we need to do." Um, I really felt God speaking to me saying, "You don't need to put up billboard signs. You need to send text messages." And I went, "Okay,
Hmm.
that makes sense because, how many people are going to see a billboard sign?"
Hmm.
And so that's what we were able to do. We were in touch with the local authorities and the telecommunications and told them our plan is to prevent these children from being abandoned. And they were so excited about it that they basically funded the program. They didn't charge us anything to send out text messages.
Hmm.
And we started it took about 2 years of planning. And the first set of text messages went out to over 5 million phones in our area. And it said, if you need help and you have a small baby, don't abandon your baby, please call this number or text. And what they can do is, if they don't have money to call or text because it's by the minute, they can send us a message saying, call me back or text me back. I don't have money, basically. Call me. And so it immediately took off. Within a few days, we had over 500 phone calls. And to be honest, we've seen hundreds, I mean, really thousands of lives saved just in the last couple years since we started this. And my prayer was that the next message we would send would be, if you feel like you have to have an abortion, please call this number. Or if you're pregnant and need help, please call this number. And it was amazing. That would have been a harder message to send. I don't think that the government would have easily agreed to paying for that message because unfortunately, from the West, abortion has become common in Ethiopia. Before the Western world, Europe and America brought abortion in, there was no such thing. Like just, I mean, I'm sure there were cases, but it was just so uncommon. And I remember speaking to a group of students about the development of the baby in the womb and abortion. And these were college students, and only one of them had questions. The rest of them totally agreed. One of them kind of said a few things that sounded like they heard something from America or something. But it was amazing. But nowadays it's become so common. And so it was interesting that we sent this message saying, don't abandon your baby. But what happened was we ended up getting all these phone calls from pregnant women as well. So God had already done the next part of the message. And this pregnant woman is saying, well, my baby's not born yet, but I need help. And many of them were calling us thinking that we would help them get an abortion. And that's because many times people think foreigners are going to help me to do this. And 100% of the people that have called us that have been pregnant decided to choose life for their baby after one or more conversations. You know, it's absolutely amazing. And so God has worked that as well. And it's just been such a miracle. And for example, there was one mom that she had just given birth and she was in the hospital and she was getting ready to walk away, leaving her baby behind. And the text message came through. She didn't have a phone, but one of the nurses saw her leaving and said, where are you going? And she said, I just got this message. Can I bring you to this place? And she said, yes. And now she has a healthy, probably 1-year-old boy. Yes, I know. It's just so, actually probably 2 years old now. I'm thinking the time just gets away from me. But yeah, it is. It's so amazing. And we've had people with twins and triplets and just all sorts of situations that have come because of that.
Now, Marcy, before I let you tell us about your books and how people can contact you, I know I need to ask you this question because I'm going to be asked by my wife, hey, why didn't you ask Marcy this? How can this all work with your children, your family? How do you make all that work together? You have 8 of your own. You have 4 adopted. How is life working?
So I just continually say God's mercies are new every day. A lot of prayer. We do homeschool our children, and so that makes it easy for us to go back and forth. And before we get to the closing out the program, I'd like to mention a few more things. One is that we have been in the U.S. for a period of time, over a year now, because there's a terrible war in our area. So I would ask people to please pray for this war to end. It started in August, and within a 2-day period, there were over 2,000 people that were killed just in our neighborhood. And so it's been very traumatizing for our children, our families, our staff. But the amazing thing is that our staff are quite brave and they know that they're doing God's work. And so we've been able to
Mm.
continue running Grace Center despite the war.
Mm.
And
Wow.
once, several months after, I realized, we probably are the only program that's continuing to run in the entire region, which is about 30 million people.
Mm.
Everyone else has closed up their doors. So we
Wow.
have been able to keep going because our assistant director is wonderful, but we can't be there at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And our staff feel a little bit of relief that they don't have to worry about us
Mm.
when we're there, because they would never want anything bad to happen to us in the same way we don't want anything bad to happen to them. But they realize they have no choice and they have to be there, and that God is going to use that and He's protecting them just in amazing ways. So
Mm.
we do pray for God's protection every day for them. And I would ask your listeners and viewers to please pray for an end to this war, for peace.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the other thing is that I wanted to share a little bit more about some of the other things we offer to the people. One of the things we do is, along with having a school and a children's home and a feeding program that provides thousands of meals a day, we also help women and children who are in prison. So in Ethiopia, when a mom goes to prison, her children go to prison with her.
Mm.
And one of the reasons is that this protects the children from being killed in revenge of the alleged crime of the mother.
Mm.
So when we first went into the prisons, we were actually approached by the local government, who the local government loves what we do. The government bodies responsible for women and children have actually rated us the top charity in Ethiopia for 3 years.
Mm.
But they came and approached us. You help everyone else. Can you please help these families? And we just had no idea that they existed because, to be honest, I had gone to the prison before just to try to visit the people that were in prison, and they wouldn't let me in because I was a foreigner.
Mm.
So they approached us and we began going in immediately, and we send all of those children to schools. We minister to them. We counsel them, pray with them. And even after they're released from prison, we help them, because imagine you've been in prison for 10 years. You can't go back to your village because the revenge is still there, likely. What do you do? And people won't hire you because they know you've been in prison. And so we help all these families start their lives anew.
Mm.
And so we've been doing that for a number of years as well. And another thing that we do is, over the last couple years, the water's been shut off 90% of the time. So we were able to dig
Mm.
a deep well. It's 300 feet deep. And we were blown away to see that the well's overflowing with water. It actually provides about 35 gallons of water per second. And we
Wow.
realized that was enough to support the entire city where we live. It's about 500,000 people where we're at. And so we have over 1,000 people a day coming to get water at this point. And that's just been another huge way that we can, really reach people, because we get a chance to talk to them and see them. And then one more thing I wanted to add is that we've been asked for many years to expand Grace Center beyond Bahir Dar. And I always knew that Grace Center wasn't about the location, it was about the people. And God's people are everywhere. And so we were given land in another area of Ethiopia called Debre Marcos. It's about 4 hours south of Bahir Dar. And we've officially begun construction on that land to be able to serve the people in that area. And just like there weren't any programs like Grace Center when we first went to Bahir Dar, there weren't any programs in this area either. 350,000, no soup kitchens, nothing. And
Mm.
so we have been able to go in there, and we're going to start this program there. And we're also expanding, looking at expanding to other parts of the world, because we know that God's heart is for His people to be well and to live out the life that He's called them to live. And I believe that every person on the earth has a calling, and it's our job to help them to reach that point where they can live out their call.
Beautiful. Some of these photos, I should just say, that we've been playing as we've been speaking are your own. Some of them also taken by others. You have a beautiful photo book yourself available. What's that called, and how can people get it?
Sure. Our book is available on our website, gracecenterfoundation.org. If you go to the homepage and scroll down, you'll see the books. The photo book is called Glimpse Africa, The Women of Bahir Dar. And I spent about 10 years working on that book and putting together the stories. It's basically before and after stories of the families that have come to us. So you see the person that is very sickly and unwell, malnourished, and then you see them healed and well. And most of the stories have these amazing, miraculous endings to them. We had one girl that was completely miraculously healed of complete heart failure, and her heart was completely fine after praying for her for about a year. So I love to share those stories with people. And then the other book is called Mama Meheret. Meheret means mercy, and in Ethiopia they think my name is Mercy, not Marcy. And I'm happy about that, because they always ask me, "Oh, your name's not Mercy. What does Marcy mean?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what it means. I think it's the ruler of the planet Mars or something like that." And they think, "Why would someone name their child that?" Every name in Ethiopia has a meaning. So they call me Mercy, which is Meheret. And so that is my story about a lot of what I share with you, and so much more, about just these adventures of starting Grace Center and being in all these different countries in Africa and raising children and all the people that have come to us and things like that.
Beautiful. Now, a lot of people might want to support your work. We have a Life Funder set up for you, which is listed at the bottom of this video and shows up on the screen here. And what's your final message for the people mostly of America, Canada, and the West who watch our program?
Sure. We can't do this work without you. We are mostly funded by individuals, and it's people that just hear what we're doing and say, "I want to be a part of that." And in addition, I think being pro-life is so much more than just pregnant women or elderly. It's the entire life process from conception to natural death. And it's so important that we realize that everything that we do for every person on this earth matters, because we're doing it unto the Lord.
Beautiful. We're going to conclude in a second. There's one question I failed to ask you that we're going to insert into it. And it's this. Marcy, in addition to bringing the, food, nourishment, healthcare, and just basic care to people, how do you bring them the faith?
Well, we offer prayer for every person that comes to us. We're well connected with the local church leaders, the priests, and we mainly have conversations with people, to be honest, because I found that one-on-one conversations in Ethiopia go a really long way. And usually these people are already hungry for the Lord, because they have spent so much of their life suffering. I mean, the stuff that we see there and the ways that these people have suffered, I wonder, how is this person still alive? People come to us with these tumors and these growths that it's like they're like the lepers in the Bible. People literally clear the streets when they walk through. And when we're able to help them with all of their physical needs, they know that what we're saying about everything else must be true. And so through that one-on-one conversation, we're able to help them come to know the faith and steer them in the right direction. And we also make it very intentional. All of our staff, many of the people that we serve are Orthodox, so they have a foundation of God, of the Trinity, but maybe they have never been educated or been in church, because there's a lot of different rules that go along with that, similar to the Old Testament. So, for example, this boy that came to us with this very large growth on his foot, that again, people would clear the road when he would walk through. God spoke to him in a dream and told him he needed to get up and walk, and he ended up at our gate, many, many miles away. But he didn't know who God was. He just knew he heard this voice, and this voice had spoken to him. And it was interesting. In his story, everyone kept saying, "We're going to have to amputate your leg." And he said, "No, that's not what my dream was. My dream was that someone would cut off this growth." And we ended up going to many different doctors. And he said, well, I guess I came to the wrong place. And I said, no, give us another day. We brought all of our staff to pray for him. And we stood around him. By the way, it wasn't all of our staff, it was all of our administrative staff. We have over 200 staff members at Grace Center. So all of our administrative staff. The next day I was meeting with a friend who was from Europe. And I said, you know, I have this boy that came to us, and let me know if there's anything you can do. She was a physical therapist. And she said, oh, send that photo to me and I'll send it to my husband. I completely forgotten that her husband was a doctor. And by this time we had exhausted all those areas of getting him help. And she texted me later that day. She said, my husband said he'll do the surgery the next business day to remove the growth. This was after we've been told by everyone. Even one doctor said, I don't care where you go. If you go to the United States or Europe, you are still going to have this leg amputated. That's what one doctor said. And so here we go. This prayer was answered after we prayed for him, and he had the surgery. And I met with her the following week, and I said, I just really want to thank you and your husband for doing this. I mean, we looked everywhere. And I kind of jokingly said, even this doctor told us that we'd have to have his leg amputated even if we went to America. And she responded, she said, well, actually, that's probably true, because my husband is the only doctor in the world that specifies in doing this type of surgery for this type of tumor on the leg and foot. And I kind of went,
gosh.
Okay, God. So these are the kinds of things we see every day, right? It's just like, and
Just
the boy is still with us. He's a young adult. He goes to school at night, because my whole point in saying this was that he had never been able to go into the church or near to the church. He was forced to stay outside watching the cattle his entire life until he came to us. And so that has changed, obviously. Yeah, he has a new life. Yes.
Marcia Erickson, thank you so much for sharing with us what you do. I'm sure many, many people are going to want to join you in your mission. God bless you, and may he continue to bless you and all of your many, many children, far beyond the 8 you have, the 4 you adopted, but the many, many who would consider you their mother of mercy.
God bless you.
Thank you, John Henry. God bless you and your beautiful family and all the work that you do. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And God bless all of you. And we'll see you next time.